asked everyone on the pod to do some homework last week, which was to read McKay Coppins' article in The Atlantic about his year
Yes.
as a sports gambler. And I hope you all have done that because John and I want to take 20 minutes and actually talk about this in some specificity with some detail. What was your first impression when you came across this article?
I think this article is really interesting. So a few, I guess, items of note. So again, he's an Atlantic writer. He is a practicing Mormon, which bans sports gambling, which was a new fact. I didn't know that. But he basically, through his priest or whatever the title of his cleric is, got permission through this work-related purpose to basically be given work money to the tune of $10,000.
The Atlantic gave McKay Coppins $10,000 to experiment with sports gambling, and they said that they would split any winnings with him 50-50. That's the premise of this article.
Right. And so he was not on the hook though for any losses. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Because he ends up losing money, right? Is how it ends?
Yeah, he ends the year like minus $5,000 basically.
Right. So does the Atlantic like just foot the bill for that basically? Like,
yeah,
because they end up paying $15,000. Right?
Well, no, I mean they gave him up to $10,000. He lost $5,000, so they ended up paying a total of $5,000.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm tracking. So yeah, so he goes on this year-long experiment. And if you think back, if you listen to this show for a little bit, we did a couple specials on sports gambling probably a year and a half ago that were in part inspired by a similar journey that our esteemed host Chad Wiley went on, that honestly, on a more limited scale was very similar to the experience that McKay Coppins went on. So I think we need to harken back to that a little bit.
It's a bit of an exaggeration to say that I have experience in sports gambling. I had one weekend of minimal sports gambling.
But it was experience gambling on sports. But I do think that, like, if you listen to those episodes, we did chronicle at the time what it was like for you to even try.
Yeah.
Right. We talked about the frustrations you experienced, the fascinations you experienced, and ultimately I would say the very strong stance against the institution that you took once that experience had finished. And we talked about it extensively. Obviously, we've talked about it many times over the last couple of years. But I think this story is so interesting because Coppins takes that conversation and is like, what if I, who have no connection to this entire institution at all, tried it basically with no stakes for myself and just like tried to do it to the max? What would that experience be like? And this whole story is basically him mentally feeling the effects over and over and over again, even with no real stakes other than just his desire to win and the potential to win money. He kind of loses it a little bit. And I think it really is fascinating, and there are so many reasons for why, but that's kind of my initial impression. What did you sent it to me, I think, originally. What did you think as you read it?
No, I thought it was interesting because like there are so many pieces, like so many similarities, I guess, between the experience that he had and the experience that I had. Obviously, he did it for multiple months. He did it with significantly higher financial amounts than I did. But, this is I think what's fascinating about it is that McKay Coppins describes himself as not an addictive personality, as generally anti-gambling, obviously religiously anti-gambling.
Right.
And spoiler alert, but this article ends with him having to put himself on a voluntary self-exclusion form at the end of this because he's worried that he's going to keep gambling after the experiment ends.
Right.
Like, it is a complete descendancy into madness. And I think it's very helpful, and I think it's very courageous for him to like put his own life kind of on display like this. And this has become like one of the most talked about pieces of journalism I've consumed in the last year. Like the Dispatch did a podcast about this. I've heard lots of different people talking about this story in my own personal life on podcasts that I listen to. it's fascinating. I want to talk about, I think, some of the things that he identified about gambling that are similar to, I think, what is true and also the experience that I had. But I think my first impression is that, like many addictive substances, it starts with people who believe it won't be me.
Right.
And McKay Coppins was that way, and I was that way. And it is genuinely shocking how fast you can become that person you never thought you were, to the point where this person in Coppins has to submit a form that in his state that prohibits him from entering a casino or gambling online. He has to voluntarily fill out that form because he is worried that he will continue gambling with his own money after this experiment ends. I don't know if I don't think in the article that he called himself an addict, but he certainly was acting with addicted tendencies throughout this experiment. And there were so many, like, the if kind of the part that I would love to lean in on is the part where he asks someone who does gambling help, like a gambling help service. He asks him, like, what are kind of the indicators that someone is becoming addicted, and like some of the indicators were like uh staying up like super late to watch West Coast games, or like all these things that he was doing and that I was that I was doing. And it's just crazy, like, how fast that slippery slope starts sending you down a deep descent.
Yeah. And I think there are obviously people, and he calls this out, there are obviously people who are successful, relatively speaking, in sports gambling. Like, that is a reality. And I think that possibility is why sports gambling is popular. Like, the idea that it could be you, that you could get rich quick, is an inherently human desire. Like, think about like the California gold rush. It's a classic example. The potential for unlimited wealth, at least in people's minds, was there. And so thousands and thousands of people like stream across the US on an incredibly difficult journey to California to go pan for gold, just in the hope that they could get rich quick. They could do something that no one else could. And the vast majority of those people were immediately impoverished, right? Because they didn't get rich quick. Because most of the time in life, you do not get rich quick. It is like a 1 in a million situation. But for some reason, we always believe that we're the one to do it. And the reality is, most of the time, the people who are really smart, who do get rich, and maybe sometimes even get rich quickly, are the people who are abusing or changing the system in some way. You know, even if it's completely legitimate, it's the people who work within the system, who understand the system, who break the system in some way and figure out how to make it work for them. There are smart people who can be good at sports gambling specifically, but the people who really make money are not the people who go into the closed system that is sports gambling and try to make their life work in the rigged system. It's the people who are creating the system in the first place for the other people to play in this essentially artificial game, right? And I think that's what's interesting as a starting point here. Like, sports gambling has always existed in tandem with sports. I think because we have the desire to predict what's going to happen with sports. And like, it's such a human desire, whether it's like literal chariot racing in ancient Rome, or cockfighting, or American football or whatever. Now we're reaching the point, and this was barely even in the article, but like, prediction markets like Kalshi make gambling basically like universal. We can gamble on everything now. And
Yeah,
it's just, it's
and
crazy.
it invites insider trading and corruption.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah. I want to talk about that at the end. I would like to talk about that. To me, I think at the surface level, what this article communicates to me, and this is something that like I feel, and something that like David French talked about when he was reacting to this podcast on the Dispatch podcast, is the idea that unlike playing the slot machine at a casino or unlike buying a lottery ticket, even a casual sports fan can convince themselves that sports gambling is something they could be good at, right?
Right.
Like, because you watch it, you listen to people talk about it, you think you know something. Like every sports fan thinks that they're really smart about sports.
Right.
Um, and because of that instinct that we all have, we think that's I think almost any sports fan thinks, oh, I could make money sports gambling. I would just naturally know which side to take the majority of the time. And that's not true because the smartest people, like you said, are the ones who are setting the odds. Where they're the ones who worked for DraftKings. They're the ones who work for FanDuel. They're the ones who are manipulating the system. And I think the article touched on a little bit, and something we've talked about as well, is that like where is the edge in sports gambling is actually not on the NFL because that's where the most of the money is, and so that's where the odds makers are investing the most into getting the odds perfect. The place
Right.
where there's an edge in sports is in the third tier of Turkish soccer,
Right.
where all the corruption is, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
those are the places where the major odds makers aren't as focused on those areas, and so bettors can acquire an edge in those areas, and it's also where most of the corruption goes under the radar because obviously, like the scandal in Turkey or in soccer or in China in soccer that we talked about is just significantly more extreme than it is in the major American sports. And so I think that something that McKay experienced and something that I experienced is the belief that I will be good at this because I'm a sports fan, because I watch sports. And it's a lie. It's a complete lie.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and it reminds me, like, switching fields for a minute. It is very similar to the world of investing in a lot of ways. Like, obviously, it is kind of a microcosm in a funny way that is it operates in different spheres, um, but stock trading and day trading and things like that operate off of a very similar human desire, sometimes with way more money, sometimes with the same amount of money. Um, but it's that belief that you know you know enough to beat the system, to just predict the world at large. And we convince ourselves that the more knowledge you accumulate, the more the even if you're not perfect, you're good enough that you can predict wealth for yourself, basically. And the reality is, like, most smart financial planners, like, I'm certainly not a financial planner, but like most smart financial planners will say that, like, the vast majority of people will not beat the market by figuring out all the different trucks, uh figuring out all the different stocks that you need to trade at different times of day to, like, make the exact right amount of money so you can keep kind of beating the market time over time. Like, most of the time they advise you to just invest your money long term and just hope that the market over time will increase, right? Kind of similarly here, like, it's a very similar principle that you trick yourself into thinking that, like, I can research enough and learn enough and know enough just by being me and being smart enough that, like, I can make these decisions that these experts who are also predicting are also not able to do. Like, our March, I think the brackets with March Madness is a much smaller but hilarious example of what this is like. Like, you and I maybe don't pretend to be college basketball experts, but, like, we come in with sports knowledge, and plenty of college basketball experts come in with sports knowledge and are like, yeah, I'm the guy. I know what's going on. And the vast majority of the time, every single one of those brackets gets busted, no matter how much basketball these people know. And to me, like, that is a perfect example of exactly how difficult this is.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's something that people think that you can like McKay talks about all of the time he spends consuming media, like listening to podcasts about fantasy football and so like it's something where like you think that you can improve at it and like actually do your homework to get better at. He talks a lot about like just the amount of time that it consumed, how quickly his family went from kind of like, "Oh, this is a fun new hobby my dad has taken up," to, like, genuinely, like, resenting the fact that he was doing that. I think it's interesting that and, like, again, courageous that he was willing to share that, but, like, the strain it took on his family. He talks about, like, hiding in the kitchen pantry, placing bets because he's scared that his kids will see it. He talks about his six-year-old knowing what prop bets and multi-game parlays are, like, at age 6, and it's just, like, it's a whole crazy ecosystem that doesn't just impact you, but it impacts the people that are around you. It
Right.
impacts so much about his life. And again, it's one of those things that like if I had continued past 3 days, like who knows where I'd be? Genuinely, even though I come on this podcast and I'm very anti sports gambling, like all of the tendencies that McKay was talking about, I'm fully capable of having those tendencies in myself. Like I think we all are, and that's
Hmm.
another fascinating part of this. I would love to talk a little bit about something that McKay didn't talk about with you, John, which is prediction markets. Because so far in sports gambling, the leagues and the bookmakers have done a good job of at least projecting as if they are against insider trading or insider information, right? Like
Hmm.
all the leagues still have bans on their athletes doing it. Obviously, the Terry Rozier case was an instance of insider information going to gamblers. Um, so it's obviously not ideal, but it's not. There is still a difference here. But these prediction markets, like Polymarket or Kelce, have really opened the door to just blatant and unhidden insider trading and corruption that nobody seems to care about or is doing anything about. Um, Most recently, I'm reading on PBS that right before hours before Donald Trump announced that the US and Iran were engaged in productive talks, several newly created Polymarket accounts bet $160,000 that a ceasefire would happen between the US and Iran between March 31st and April 15th. And if that happens, those anonymous accounts will make about $1 million. So again, I can't prove that those are, White House people or people within, but this is not the
But it's
only time
possible.
this has
Yeah.
happened. The same thing happened before Venezuela. The same thing happened before the strikes in Iran, where these few anonymous accounts are betting huge amounts of money on events that literally happen hours later. You have journalists, you have a journalist in Israel getting threatened because if he changes the wording of a story in the Jerusalem Times, it will cause people to receive a huge payout because they bet on a missile being dropped in the region on a certain day, but there's some technicality in the wording of the reporting that is causing that payout to not happen, and so this journalist is getting like death threats about it. Like this is just a crazy situation, and so like I think the worst case scenario is that as a society we stop taking the integrity of these things seriously. Not that they have a whole lot of integrity in the first place, but if we're just as a collective society going to be okay with what's happening on Polymarket or on Kelshi, if we're not going to seriously clamp down on this blatant corruption, then what's to stop DraftKings and FanDuel from saying, okay, we're not going to really worry about it that much either, or the leagues to do that?
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. I think the prop betification of the world is an unmitigated disaster, specifically in the area of government corruption. Obviously, insider trading is illegal for a reason, because it is making money on yourself and allowing yourself to manipulate the market and basically just take control of businesses in a way that steals money from the shareholders. Like that is exactly what you're doing. You're stealing money from shareholders. And in the case of politics, I mean, you're stealing money ultimately from the American people. Like you are using your governmental power to just rake money into yourself, and that is anti-American. That is anti-democratic, and it's a shame. And it's good to see that there are at least some politicians who seem to be, starting to speak up about bipartisan stops to this gambling industry at large. I think that's good. I think it needs to happen. Um, to be honest, I mean, I am not like it'd be great if sports gambling was shut down, but I'm not advocating for that. But I do think that prediction markets like genuinely should be shut down.
They're
Like,
horrible. They're
I'll
they're
go
they're
out that
not
and
just
say that right
immoral,
now.
but they're really bad for society.
Yeah, like there's no good. I've said this about sports gambling, but there's zero good that comes out of prediction markets about real world events. Like, why do you need to bet on any of those things? Like, genuinely, what is the point?
Yeah,
Um,
I completely agree with you.
it's shocking to me, and it is an example of like how little these industries care about you, the person. Like, they do not care, and
Yeah,
that's a real problem.
yeah. If you want to steer the conversation anywhere you want after I want to go one more direction and then open it up to anything you want to talk about. But
Yeah,
um, my kind of final thought, and this is I think the primary counter argument that we receive is that when we talk about sports gambling, is that well all of these things would be happening anyway. But at least now with the legalization of sports gambling, it's happening in the open, and so it can be caught. And that's something that the leagues tout. Like the leagues are actually touting the amount of arrests and that have happened, the amount of suspensions as proof that this is working, as proof that by legalizing it, we are more able to shed light on the corruption, stop it at the root, and fix it. That's something that McKay deals with in his article. I think that's a significant counter argument that you and I have received as we've been dialoguing about this on the podcast. Um, I guess like what do you think about that as a counter argument and how would you respond to it?
yeah. I mean, it is a good question, and I would say that like if you regulate it more than it currently is, that ultimately will be a good thing. Um, so but right now, what I'm not seeing is enhanced regulation on sports gambling. I'm seeing the government basically get more revenue from sports gambling taxes. Basically, obviously there is a little bit of there are arrests that are happening in certain circumstances, as we've documented well on this show, and I do think like those are not unimportant things. Um, but I think ultimately, like my primary thought, and it's something I've said on the show before, is you know sports gambling illegally or in just casinos was something that happened, but it happened under the surface. It was a relatively large industry, but it did not control the sports world. And legalized sports gambling controls the sports world. And to me, there's no net gain for the sports world. The only thing that happens is more money that is piped into these sports books' pockets and more money that is piped into the leagues, and that doesn't benefit the fans. Like the NFL having more money has done nothing but worsen the experience for the average NFL fan, because going to NFL games is more expensive than it ever has been, ever. And like you can't convince me, like if you want to make a business argument for why sports gambling benefits the NFL, like to a degree, you can sort of make that argument that you make Roger Goodell more rich, right? But I think there are zero arguments you can make that sports gambling make the ultimate experience of any sport better for any fan. I feel very strongly about
Yeah.
that. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, I agree with you. I think like there's a libertarian streak in me that says, well, maybe it's okay. Like if in a vacuum, DraftKings and FanDuel or BetMGM can be legalized, maybe there is a world in which that's okay. But I think that the mistake that the lawmakers made at the time that they legalized sports gambling was by allowing the leagues and the media companies to be in partnership with
Right.
with the betting companies. That is the most significant problem with what is going on right now. If if DraftKings was happening off on the side and it was completely divested from any league or media interest and fans could do it off on the side, but the leagues had a very explicit zero tolerance policy, and not only a no tolerance policy, but they weren't in sponsorship with the like if they were not involved at all, if there was no commingling between these two things, I would feel much more comfortable. I still wouldn't like it, but I would be more comfortable with something like DraftKings existing. but this melding between gambling companies, TV companies, and the actual sporting leagues is not only causing, like, immoral and illegal activity, but it is ruining the integrity of sports. It is and that's I think that's something else that McKay Coppins talked about, is that, like, we now have situations where the majority of Americans believe that sports have lost their integrity, or that sports have, like, that the integrity of sports is going down because of sports gambling. If that trend continues, sports will be ruined forever.
Yeah.
Um, and s and that's what the American people are thinking right now, that the integrity is going down. And so, um, I don't know if we talked about this story in particular, but I saw that, like, Amazon Prime is now going to be integrating betting into the Amazon Prime app, so that while you're watching a game on Amazon Prime, you can click a button without even leaving the game and place bets on it, or follow your bets in real time. That's the most dangerous thing. That and the fact that the leagues are in partnership with them as well. Like, this is where the majority of the problems are. So, in if I was czar of America, there would be no sports gambling. But even if there was, but it was not happening this way, I think there are ways that it could be better. But my fear is that that ship has sailed, and that by not making that line at the beginning, it's kind of too little, too late at this point to fix anything.
Yeah, I think the only hope for sports in relation to gambling would be a very significant governmental intervention, because the leagues are not truly benefited by removing money. Like, from their pocketbook perspective, them getting rid of sports gambling is removing money from their
Right.
pocketbooks.
Which is why they never should have been allowed to benefit in the first place.
Right. The fact that now we're here means that, like, the leagues will not regulate themselves. So the question is, in this situation, is it the government's job to get involved specifically in regulating sports? I would say that, like, the government should be regulating prediction markets, just like it, um, regulates the stock market generally. Like, I think that is important because people do overreach. I'm not that much of a libertarian, even though
Mm.
maybe I have some beliefs. Like, ultimately, a completely unregulated market, in my opinion, does not benefit business competitiveness, and it does not benefit shareholders in the wilder public. Um, and that's definitely true in sports, especially when we think about sports as not just a commercial enterprise, but also a community institution. And I think that matters. Um, I think sports is more commercial than it's ever been in human history. It's more global than it's ever been in human history. It's more big business than it's ever been. Um, and that brings fun to us, that lets us watch sports in different ways than we ever could before. But you and I both know, and I think if you're listening to this show, you probably listen because you at least feel to a degree that, you know, we are missing some of the meaning that we at least felt like we used to have. Maybe that's all a pipe dream, and maybe it was always like this. But to me, it feels like we are progressively losing more and more. Even when we just think about the price of sports, like the ability for a normal fan to go to a sports game, as we've cataloged well in this show, has gone dramatically down over this century. Um, and that's like what sports are all about: is being there in the mix in real life, not on TikTok. Um, and that experience is harder and harder to get. The experience of following your team is harder and harder to get, and the people who would benefit are the people who own teams, the people who own the league, people who own sports books. And um, yeah, we always have someone to point the finger at. And uh, to a degree, the blame is always at us for where we spend our money, um, where fans spend their money at large. But I do think that, like, this is the reality of the sports world we live in.
Yeah. I mean, we're gonna have a completely separate podcast about how this is by far the most expensive World Cup in the history of most expensive sporting event in the history of all sports. So this
Yep.
upcoming World Cup. That'll be a World Cup preview conversation as we continue to kind of process that. But I would just say that I don't have his exact numbers that he cited in the article, but the reality is that Americans are waking up to the fact that this is a problem. The majority of Americans at this point believe that sports are losing integrity, and that's something that if I was a sports commissioner, I would have to take very seriously, even
Yeah.
though my league and my owners are pocketing all this money from DraftKings and FanDuel and all these other places. Like, none of that is going to matter if you turn into the WWE. You know why no one bets in WWE? Because it's not random.
It's not real. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not real. There's no drama. There's no stakes. And so betting is not really possible on it. Oh, I'm sure you can on Polymarket, but I'm sure you actually can on Polymarket, but
Probably.
Yeah. And I've said this probably 8 times on this podcast now, but is Roger Goodell, do you want the NFL to turn into the WWE? If not, now is the time to act before it's too late. Adam Silver, Rob Manfred, like, same to you. If you don't stop it now, it will be too late when you wake up to it. That's it.
That's exactly right. And I mean, think about something like the Oscars. This is a tangent, but like the more money that's bettable on something like the Oscars, the more that, like, think of all those Academy voters who are just like not fully random people, but like those people can be incentivized to, if someone finds out what the results are, to leak those, like, bet tons of money. Like, there are so many places where when you expand it out into the broader prediction markets too, like, it's just, there will be dire consequences in the long run for so many social institutions if we continue down this path.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, but like Polymarket and Kelce can be a huge part in like why society collapses. Like, full stop.
Yeah.
They're evil.
They are. This is an official podcast dance. Clip that.
Yeah, evil. What an optimistic pod we've had. We've really we've just brought the good vibes yet again.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to do before we get out of here?
I'm trying to think if there's another doom and gloom topic I can bring up to conclude things. You know what's not doom and gloom? Going to space.
Yeah,
going to space is
right.
awesome.
That's right. Whether you're at the cinema watching Project Hail Mary, or whether it's the actual Artemis 2 rocket, in the year of our Lord 2026, space is back.
Space has
never been more back.
Literally in 50 years, space hasn't been more back. I think they're going to go around the moon tomorrow. I'm pretty sure is on April 6th. I think is correct, somewhere around there. So our brave 4 astronauts are almost there, which is very exciting. I think we're going to have boots on the ground in the moon
soon,
in a few years, probably.
Next step,
which is
Mars.
exciting for me. If you don't like space exploration, at me in the comments, but I'm a firm proponent.
Yeah. Thank you for turning this pod around. Thank you for bringing the vibes back.
Nothing makes me more optimistic about humanity than going to the moon.
Yeah.
To be honest,
I think it's awesome. I really do. Like, I think it is an amazing thing that we're doing, and I think that we should all be talking about it and watching it and supporting it.
I would way rather spend billions of taxpayer dollars on that than like prediction markets or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good take. Very strong of you.
I think all government official winnings that are made on prediction markets that are being done illegally should be confiscated and given to NASA. That's my belief.
I agree. I really do.
That's all I've got.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening to the pod.